How much agency do you give your players in the settlements that you create? Today we're going to talk about how to build vibrant settlements and how to give your players lots of choices when they're wandering around. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Dungeon Brewed.
Welcome back everyone to Dungeon Brewed. Today we are going to be talking about settlements and how they play a key role in collaborative storytelling in your tabletop role-playing game. Now John and I did a series on settlements about a year ago where we broke down many different types of settlements and what you needed to include in each one of those in order to have them be functional and also believable. I'll link that up above so that you can check it out when we're done here. But let's go ahead and answer the simple question, what is a settlement? Well, it is an inhabited location that exists within your game world. It could be a roadhouse or a small outpost where you only have a handful of people. It could be a village or a town where you have local trade and maybe even like an adventurer board for adventurers to check regularly. Or it could be a city or a metropolis that has a lot of intrigue and politics and factions and danger overall. Regardless, whatever size your settlement is, it should serve some sort of purpose within the story. It could be a pit stop before a big journey, it could be a central hub for quests, or maybe it's the setting for political conflict. The settlement overall, though, should feel alive and meaningful, so we're going to talk about how you accomplish that task. The first step that I like to take in creating any settlement is asking the question, why does this settlement exist? Oftentimes for me, it's because of story integration. I need a settlement to exist because I need something to fit within the game narrative so that it, one, becomes maybe a launching point for quests, or maybe it has some sort of secret mystery to uncover, or maybe I need some place for a major battle to take place. I want it to exist for some reason to push the story along, to be a launching point for the story, or to keep the story to continue to progress for the players in some way. I also oftentimes try to question what exactly is the geographical or economic role for this particular settlement. It might have a particular resource that sustains that settlement in some way. It could be a fishing village, it could be a mining town, it could be a religious outpost. There's something central that this settlement provides or creates or harbors that they are able to essentially push out to the rest of the world or to push the story along in some way. So for instance, I might have a settlement that is able to dig up iron because it's a mining settlement, and that iron is needed by the king and they ship it out to him in order for their blacksmiths to make weapons and armor for the war that's currently occurring in the north. And then third, another question I like to ask is, what is the cultural or historic importance for this particular settlement? Now, I may get a little in the weeds on this particular question because I like to have this information for myself. I don't always even necessarily need to give it to the players unless it's directly impacting the quest in some way or there's information at this particular landmark that is needed for the players. But knowing what the traditions are or the legends are or the conflicts that have shaped its identity can give you a really clear idea of how the people within that settlement respond after generations of living with this cultural truth. So an example that you might have in creating a settlement here is imagining that your players are coming across some roadhouse in the mountains. Why is it there? Maybe it's a refuge for travelers escaping war-torn lands. Maybe it's run by a retired warrior who is secretly harboring fugitives from the local war and getting them back home again. Or maybe it's a meeting place for underground resistances or even an underground faction of some kind that is starting up a rebellion against some major landlord or something along those lines. Landlord? Why not? A landlord. So every settlement should have some sort of reason behind its existence beyond just being a stopping point on the map. And you want to ask yourself, why is it here? Once you know why it exists, then you want to understand what drives the particular settlement. Like I mentioned, it could be a resource-driven settlement. It might be a fishing town or a mining colony or even a logging village that's really close to natural resources. You will notice throughout human history, we build settlements in particular areas based on the resources that they provide or the necessity of having access to particular resources to serve a larger purpose. So there might be a good reason why a settlement exists in a particular region of your world. It might also just be a trade hub. Maybe it's a bustling city at a crossroad or it's along a major river, and it serves the purpose of essentially connecting one settlement with another settlement with the particular goods that they're providing or offering to one another. It could also be a military outpost. It's put somewhere for a strategic strategic purpose to fortify against external threats and protect an overall nation. It could be a religious or a mystical center, so there might be a temple or a hidden monastery there. Or it could be near a cursed town because they're trying to ward away the dead that are rising up in that particular area, so they built a religious place in order to keep them back or ward them off from the lands of the living. Or it could be a criminal haven. It's a settlement that's been put together from smugglers to rogues to pirates to whatever, to essentially have a point for them to fall back on where they're supported by their own kind. One of my favorite examples for a settlement that kind of serves a really great purpose is in the Wheel of Time. There's a lot of border towns that exist to defend against the Blight's creeping darkness that exists in the Westlands. So you have Shinar that is there, which is a driving force to protect the Westlands from the evil that exists within the Blight. So it's all about survival, it's about duty, it's about military readiness in some way. So you want to consider, how is your settlement going to interact with the world and the dangers that exist within that world? Who keeps things thriving? Who keeps things from getting worse for the patrons or the inhabitants of the world? How do you limit suffering and the struggles that people are going through? So some points of interest that you might have in a settlement when you're creating it is making sure there's something unique in each given place, which is, again, a feature that we find in our known world. There might be landmarks like an ancient ruins or a magical obelisk. We don't find that in our real world, but gladiator arenas, particular rocks that mirror something or resemble something that is meaningful to us, something that is a landmark that stands out against everything else. There could be some famous figures that you have that live within a particular place. I mean, think of Elminster out of Baldur's Gate, and we know he's from Baldur's Gate, like he's renowned for being there. You could also have famous bards or legendary blacksmiths or notorious crime lords that exist within your settlement, and that town is known for that person inhabiting that space. Or you could have some mystery or rumors that are attached to a settlement that makes it a place of intrigue. It raises the stakes for players, and they want to go and investigate the place to see exactly what is going on. So you could have a town that has a haunted district, or maybe there is a hidden vault at a monastery that is off in a forest buried away. Or perhaps there is a coastal metropolis where you have a missing heir, and the king has sent out for adventurers far and wide in order to find his daughter for an award. These types of things can really drive your players to want to go and investigate a place, and you know there's a very specific purpose to that location. So, for example, you might have a coastal town, and it seems normal, but there's rumors of strange lights that are beneath the waves, and there's a lot of question as to what exactly this might be. It could be a lost treasure, it could be a forgotten civilization, or maybe it's something much worse. Anytime that you create a settlement, you want to make sure that you are taking into consideration player agency. Are you making sure that there are multiple paths that exist so that players can explore the city freely, and there's many different hooks that can drive them into the quest line or the storyline of what's going on in that city, so they have the freedom to explore and the freedom to make their own choices. So you might have a lot of different factions that are warring with each other, or maybe you even have a rebellious group of townsfolk and a corrupted mayor. The players should be able to explore and maybe get a different version of what that conflict is from any opposing side that gives them a different quest to accomplish that's all built around the same story. You also want to make sure there's lots of levels for exploration. You know, let's talk about the lights that would be underneath the water. Do they have the ability to go and investigate that? Can they search for someone who had seen them and get some additional information about it? Are there some local legends that they find in the books at the local church that talk about these lights and give them this long-ended quest to essentially find a roundabout way of discovering what they are without directly going to the waters and endangering themselves? The other thing that I really like to do is introduce a moral dilemma so that players have enough agency to make their own decisions and having a real-world impact based on the decisions they make. So, in your game, you could have a town that is split between two rival guilds. The players could choose a side. They could remain neutral and try to broker for peace, or maybe they just burn the whole system to the ground. These choices make the world feel reactive, it makes it feel alive, and it gives the players agency to move forward. So as the game master, you want to have contingencies for each one of these choices that you make, and make sure that there's roads or avenues for them to travel down no matter what it is that they choose, so that they have the freedom to explore and tell the story with you. All right, I want to take just a couple of minutes and I want to talk about the layout and design of a settlement and give you some food for thought on things that you want to consider when you're building each one of these. Because every settlement should have believable geography, infrastructure, and key NPCs included. So I'm going to give you just a rundown of some things that you want to consider including in each one of your settlements to make them feel as though they are real. Let's start off with districts and zones. You want to divide a settlement into functional areas so it feels a little bit more authentic. So you want it to have several different districts and zones within the settlement, depending on how large it is. So some things that you may consider is a marketplace where traders and merchants and street performers can gather. You might also have a noble quarters where it's home to the ruling elite and it's walled off from the lower class. There could be a slums district where there's poor individuals, there's high crime, and there's underground dealings. I always like to have a docks and trade area if I have, of course, a settlement next to the sea. That is essential for the cities relying on commerce and shipping. And then, of course, having some sort of military district where there's barracks, a training grounds, fortifications, and possibly even a jail. You also then want to consider what your buildings are going to be and what the key NPCs are in each one of those locations. Of course, almost every settlement, even the roadhouse, is either a tavern or an inn of some sort. So it's a social hub where adventurers are gathering, you're getting information. In this place, you want to know who runs that tavern. Are they connected to an underground network? What is their motivation? How do they greet adventurers when they come in? What is their knowledge of the region? Do they have quests? All those types of things. Then, of course, you have a blacksmith or a general store, a place where the players can go with their characters to buy and repair gear. Does that blacksmith maybe have a secret past as a warrior? And does that come into play as they're looking for information on the history of a war in a nearby area? Then, of course, you might have a temple or a shrine, a center of worship, healing, and divine intervention. I like to usually identify at least the head priest in this area, maybe give him some dark secrets that he's hiding or some motivations that are underhanded that the adventurers don't know about. And then, of course, an essential building is probably going to be that guardhouse and prison. Again, every single system should have a structure of rules and law, and they should be responsive to the choices that the players make, which means that the players may make decisions that land them back in a jail cell. So here you're going to develop some sort of law enforcement. Maybe you have some potential allies or even enemies that exist within. And then as an NPC, you might decide who is the local magistrate, who is the local sheriff, is there a prison warden, is he corrupt, or are there allies within this particular area that they can work with in order to get information. Assigning those key NPCs really is pretty important for any of these locations that you're developing because that's what is going to make the settlement feel alive. You may have some settlements that are large enough that you want to create some defensive structures within those settlements, so you want to consider what the walls or the gates look like, if there's any watchtowers or fortifications, and if there's any secret escape tunnels that exist within there. I know it's kind of a quick run through, but that is something you want to think about, especially with larger cities or metropolises. And then the thing that you do want to consider for every one of them, number 4 on my list, is natural features and terrain. The geography should really impact the daily life and shape the design of the settlement. In fact, I think that's probably where I start, even though I've ended this list with this particular feature. If it's a desert city, it's going to have water sources and heat-resistant architecture in order to protect the people that live there. If it's a mountain fortress, it should be difficult to access. It should be really well defended. If it's a swamp village, it may rely on raised structures and even boat travel to get from location to location. You want to think through these elements, and it's really going to help you, again, make that settlement feel real, feel functional, and feel immersive. The last piece of advice that I want to share is making sure that your settlement is connected back to world events in some way, especially if it is something that has to do with the campaign story or the quest itself that's going on that your players are investigating. So if there's a war breaking out, how does the town change in response to that? If there's a new ruler rising to power, does the city embrace that or do they resist it? If there's some sort of magical catastrophe that happens, is the village being abandoned? Is it warped by the effects? What is the impact? And remember that settlements in general should be dynamic. They should change. They shouldn't be static. So if the players go out and engage in some sort of adventure that has a consequence to it, if they then come back to a town they were at before, how does that town change in response to the actions in the world's evolution because of what the players did or did not do. So think about that with each one of your settlements. All right, so I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you again for joining us here on Dungeon Brew. Be sure to check out our Patreon, where we have resources for game masters like you. Talk to you next time.
Dungeon Brew.